Welcome to the real F word. As you sit down with entrepreneurs that are facing adversity or maybe even facing a potential failure, what counsel would you give those entrepreneurs that are struggling to keep their companies alive and who are facing a potential failure?
Yeah. I think first I would encourage them to really make sure that they're getting honest and direct feedback from their counselors. I think everybody has a different style of giving feedback. Personally, I tend to be more direct, and that's typically how I also like to receive feedback. But I do think that just honesty really matters, and hearing really honest opinions and perceptions so that you can kind of synthesize all of those data points and make the most intelligent next step. I think the other thing, and I was just talking to a founder this week, and it's not like profound advice or business advice, but I think it's more just comfort that you're doing great. You've done more than 99% of anybody else, and nobody's walking in your shoes. And, what you've done matters to this point, and it matters after this, and you've already won, And I know that that's maybe not profound business advice but I think sometimes when we're in kind of that crucible, it's not the tactical advice we necessarily need. I think sometimes it's just the reassurance that because they're already doing everything they can. They don't need me to sit there and tell them I'm not walking their shoes. I think it's more just the reassurance that you're doing great.
I can't tell you how that is in the moments that have been the most difficult in my career. There were a few investors that showed up and they knew we were underperforming. I was doing everything that I could to try to solve really difficult problems. And I remember there were some investors that did exactly what you've done with some of your founders. And it meant the world, especially because they had so much at stake.
Yeah.
To look me in the eye and say thank you, to say you're doing all that you can. Sometimes in those moments, founders understand. They're often more critical of themselves than any of their advisors or investors. And so to have an investor show up and say, you're doing okay, you've already accomplished a lot, keep at it, that gave me fuel, right?
Yeah.
That gave me motivation. Alternatively, I've had investors that just show up and critique and just be you guys are making all the wrong decisions. And that doesn't motivate anyone to work harder.
Well,
right?
Especially the psychology of most entrepreneurs, we're there's something fundamentally kind of wrong with us, right?
For sure.
We already are very hard on ourselves. We already are probably overachievers. We are probably perfectionists.
People pleasers.
All of that wrapped into one, intense humans. And the last thing a human like that needs when they're already busting ass to do everything they can to make it work is somebody to be critical, because to your point, they already are doing that to themselves probably 10 times worse. And unless a founder asks for very tactical advice, and I try not to give advice unless I'm able to give tactical advice, but I don't feel it's not my job to give that unless it's asked for or really desired.
But it makes you a really effective investor. I love investors that were also operators, because you have been in their shoes. You may not know how to solve the specific problem that they're facing in their industry at this time, but you've been in their shoes. And not all investors have that background and experience. And so I've found that so valuable to have investors that also were operators and founders and entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because they understand in a different way what is required, the sacrifice, the grit, just the long hours, the intensity of the work over such a long period of time to really build something that is valuable.
Yeah.